This was the second the balance tipped. Not because signatures hit the page, but because something heavy finally slipped off her shoulders. For the first time since the breakup, Kandi Burruss didn't sound drained. She didn't sound guarded. She didn't sound defeated. She sounded steady. In a soft yet striking confession, Kandi revealed she had no clear map of what came next, only an unshakable belief that wherever she landed would be better than where she'd been. And this time, she intended to claim it. Those words hit like a shockwave. Because while Kandi was talking about reclaiming herself, rebuilding her core, and channeling her recovery into a demanding Broadway return, a very different reality was taking shape elsewhere. Sources say Todd Tucker has allegedly described life after the split as a reckoning he never saw coming. A void he didn't fully grasp until there was no undoing it. That split-screen reality is what made people freeze. On one side, a woman crossing into a new chapter, saying she's finally okay, finally prioritizing herself. On the other, a man left alone with the weight of what might be gone for good. Kandi didn't blur the message. This isn't a plot line. This isn't a season arc. This is lived experience. Pain processed. Work done. And as she steps into the spotlight 8 nights a week, one uneasy question hangs in the air. Did joy arrive too late for one and exactly on time for the other?
I feel like it's just the overall story of, wanting to take control of your life and, in a transitional period in your life where you don't know where you're headed, but it's going to be great when you get there.
So how would you define this next era of your life?
I don't really know where it's going to be, but I know wherever it's going to be, it's going to be amazing. I'm doing good. Honestly, this show is really helping me, Seriously, it is. Because it's making me refocus on me. You know what I mean? It's making me get back into working out and, doing my vocal training. And it's giving me something to do, more importantly. Sometimes when you're going through stuff, you have to you put yourself into your work. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I put myself in a headspace to where I have to show up and be my best self, and then of course, like the other day I posted, the other day, I guess I was having a moment, but I'm thankful to you guys. I'm back to being my normal tourist self. I have my moments like everybody else where I get emotional, but then you snap out of it and okay, I gotta be my best self. That's what it
The moment wasn't explosive. There were no sharp tones, no soundtrack rising to cue emotion. Yet something undeniable had shifted. For years, Kandi Burruss chose her words like they were fragile, calculated, as if one misstep could unravel the fragile equilibrium she'd been holding together for far too long. This time, that restraint was gone. After the divorce, for the first time, her voice sounded lighter, not forced, not performative. There was no reflexive defensiveness, no practice smile, no effort to dilute reality for the sake of appearances. What replaced it was something sharper, clarity. And that clarity made people uncomfortable. Because when Kandi spoke about her life now, she didn't cast herself as someone barely holding on. She didn't frame the moment as recovery from wreckage. She spoke as someone moving ahead, even without a clear destination yet. And that difference changed everything. The internet felt it instantly. Clips spread. Lines were isolated. Viewers fixated less on what she said and more on what was missing. There was no anger, no finger-pointing, no emotional tether to what had already passed. Only space. And inside that space, a second story quietly took shape. Multiple reports suggest Todd Tucker has allegedly characterized life after the split as far more jarring than he ever anticipated. Words like struggle, absence, and reflection began circulating in connection to him. Not claims, not admissions, but something more subdued, something resembling awareness. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On one side, Kandi appeared to be entering unfamiliar territory, uncertain, yes, but grounded. On the other, Todd was reportedly confronting what it means to recognize loss after it's already settled in. That divide became the emotional fracture at the heart of the story. Because divorce doesn't always conclude with signatures. Sometimes it ends the moment one person keeps going and the other finally realizes they didn't. For Kandi, forward motion wasn't symbolic. It was tangible, exhausting, unforgiving. Broadway. For years, she had spoken of it like a door she couldn't quite open, postponed by timing, obligations, and the weight of everything else demanding her attention. Then suddenly, the door opened. And she walked through without looking back. What made people stop wasn't just the career leap. It was what it represented. A woman closing a complicated chapter and stepping into a space where nothing is polished, nothing is cut, and nothing can be concealed. 8 performances every week. Live singing. No second takes. This wasn't safety. This was vulnerability. Fans began drawing connections almost immediately. The production she chose and Juliet didn't escape notice. A story about what comes after the love story ends. A narrative built on reclaiming control, identity, and direction once the defining relationship is over. Accidental or deliberate? As speculation grew louder, Kandi acknowledged the similarities, not with theatrics, not with resistance, but with a calm honesty that disarmed even her critics.
And Juliet has life after Romeo. That's what this whole show is about. When I first started going through what I'm going through right now, this opportunity came. And I thought about it and I was like, I'm going to do it.
So this is, I mean, wow, like life imitating art imitating life, full circle. But that it's how much of, that's so beautiful, actually, pulling on your real life experiences for this and channeling it through Angelique. How healing is that? And how challenging is that?
It's supposed to be right now. Like right now, I'm really in the thick of this and I'm really, trying to go after a dream of really like taking this to the next level, being on stage, on Broadway, doing Anne Juliet. Like that's what I'm doing.
That admission hit with unexpected force because it dismantled the assumptions people were clinging to. There was no image to maintain, no storyline to shape for viewers, no arc waiting to be stitched together in post-production. This wasn't manufactured. It was real. And reality carries fear. Kandi acknowledged it openly, the anxiety, the nerves, especially when it came to live singing. She talked about intensive work with a vocal coach, stretching her limits, retraining her body to function under relentless pressure. At one point, she mentioned her hands trembling before stepping on stage. That moment mattered. It wasn't fragility. It was vulnerability. The kind that doesn't fit neatly into inspirational captions. And still, she showed up. Not because she felt fully prepared, but because she refused to let fear make the decision for her. She explained it as something bigger than personal ambition. Her children. Kandi said she wanted them to witness her choosing difficulty over ease. To learn that fear isn't a signal to retreat, it's a challenge to confront. Fear equals failure, she said. You have to beat fear. You can't let it stop you. Those words traveled fast. Parents reshared them. Clips spread. Comment sections flooded with meaning. Some saw courage. Others saw endurance. But most people agreed on one thing: this wasn't acting. This was a woman reconstructing herself in real time, without asking anyone to feel sorry for her. At the same time, the contrast with Todd's reported mindset became more pronounced. While Kandi spoke in terms of motion, Todd was allegedly grappling with what was missing. Not rage, not accusations. Absence. And absence is often where remorse takes root. Online, reactions fractured as expected. Some wondered whether Todd only grasped the magnitude of what he lost once Kandi stepped fully into her autonomy. Others warned against turning private reckoning into public verdicts. Yet, even the voices urging caution couldn't overlook the symbolism. One person moved ahead, visibly, intentionally. The other appeared to remain in place. Then came the sentence that stilled the noise. I just do it, Kandi said, speaking about juggling 8 performances a week with everything else in her life. I just do it, because I want to do it right. No flourish followed. No dramatic emphasis. Just certainty. That line wasn't meant to inspire. It was definitive. It hinted at something deeper than drive. Acceptance. Not acceptance of what was, but of what is. And that's where this stops being a divorce story. It becomes a story about timing. About awareness. About what happens when one person outgrows a shared life, and the other realizes it after the window has closed. Kandi didn't claim triumph. She didn't present herself as fully healed. She simply kept moving. And sometimes, that's the most unsettling conclusion of all. Because even as one chapter ended quietly, the echo of what disappeared grew louder. And the question remains unanswered. Do some truths only reveal themselves once the door is already shut? And that's when the quiet became impossible to ignore. Because when someone keeps moving without glancing back, what's left behind doesn't vanish. It lingers. It settles into the space. It asks questions no one is eager to voice. For Kandi, momentum looked intentional. Controlled. Almost surgical in its execution. There was no display of heartbreak. No public collapse. Just effort. Routine. Direction. For Todd, according to people close to the situation, it unfolded very differently. Not loud. Not explosive. Just weighted. The kind of weight that comes from realizing the ending already passed, and you weren't prepared for it. What unsettled people most wasn't that Kandi seemed content. It was that she seemed unaffected. Not distant. Not hardened. Simply removed from the gravity that once shaped her every move. That removal became the real story. Because detachment isn't born from resentment. It comes from acceptance. And acceptance is usually the final phase. Reports indicate Todd has spoken privately about how abruptly life shifted once the divorce became official. How habits dissolved. How the constant presence, someone who had grounded years of his life, was suddenly absent. Not substituted. Not duplicated. Gone. That's when language changes. People stop saying we. They begin saying I. And I can echo loudly when you're alone. Meanwhile, Kandi's days filled rapidly. Rehearsals. Vocal conditioning. Physical endurance. Mental discipline. 8 shows a week leaves no space for looking back. There's no room for emotional hesitation once the curtain rises and the music begins. This wasn't avoidance. It was confrontation, just with a different challenge. Some viewers mistook it for distraction. Others labeled it drive. But those paying attention noticed something else entirely: order. When life feels unsteady, order becomes survival. And Broadway thrives on order. Every note exact. Every movement precise. Every cue unforgiving. In that world, there's no capacity to carry another person's emotional load. And that's where the imbalance widened. Todd, sources say, began expressing regret not as a proclamation, but as a realization that arrived late. Too late to alter choices. Too late to reshape outcomes. Regret doesn't usually shout. It murmurs. It surfaces in sentences like, I didn't recognize it then. Or, I didn't understand its value until it was gone. Those words began circulating. Softly at first. Then more open. Action is where endings solidify. Todd's reported reflections, by contrast, suggested awareness without direction. Looking backward without a clear step ahead. Not resentment. Not denial. Just recognition. And recognition can sting when it arrives without control. Some observers noted that regret doesn't always mean wanting someone back. Sometimes it means wishing you had shown up differently when it counted. That distinction matters here. Because nothing in Kandi's presence suggested she was waiting. Or hoping. Or leaving room for reconsideration. She had already entered a different space. Independence doesn't always appear victorious. Sometimes it's quiet, focused, unsentimental. As the weeks passed, the contrast only intensified. Kandi's schedule tightened. Performances accumulated. The strain increased. But so did the confidence, the steadiness. Todd's narrative, according to those speaking for him, remained unresolved. And that's where the unease settled. Because society often expects women to mourn publicly, to display the cost of endings, to make pain visible. Kandi didn't. She made progress visible instead. That reversal disrupted expectations. And in doing so, it reframed everything. This was no longer about who walked away, or who was right. It ultimately came down to timing, to perception, to what unfolds when one person keeps evolving while the other is still trying to understand the last version of the world they shared. Online, the reaction followed a familiar pattern. People rushed to crown victors and assign blame. But real life doesn't follow scorecards. What stands out is this: Kandi chose motion. Todd appears to be sitting with hindsight, and those directions almost never cross again. Not out of bitterness, but because progress doesn't pause. As Kandi walks onto that stage night after night, voice anchored, posture steady, the meaning becomes impossible to miss. Life after Romeo. Not rewritten, not reframed, simply lived. And sometimes the hardest truth isn't that someone walked away. It's that they stayed just long enough to grow past you, and you didn't realize it until the space between you could no longer be closed. That's where this story rests. Not in finger-pointing, not in explosive moments, but in the silent stretch between acceptance and remorse. And in the question that refuses to settle, unanswered, unresolved, and deeply unsettling. Do we only understand the worth of something once it's no longer ours? Because by the time that awareness arrives, the lights are already up. And that's when the responses started to appear. Not in a wave, not with noise, but in pieces. Offhand remarks, subtle changes in phrasing, carefully calibrated comments that revealed just enough while concealing the rest. Because when something deeply personal becomes public, the impact never stays contained between the two names on the documents. It travels. Friends sense shifts before any statement is issued. Family feels the strain long before dates are circled on legal calendars. Business partners begin asking questions they never needed answers to before. That's when internal cracks begin to surface. Those around Kandi noticed a recalibration. Not retreat, but definition. Sharper boundaries separating what was hers from what no longer had access to her. She wasn't shutting doors. She was narrowing entry points. And that difference matters. Because limiting access isn't rooted in hostility. It's rooted in self-preservation. At the same time, reports indicate Todd's circle was changing in a different way. Less intentional. More situational. When shared routines dissolve, so do some of the connections built around them. Support doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it reshapes. And reshaping can feel destabilizing when it happens alongside loss. Outwardly, both maintained restraint. No explosive sit-downs. No confessionals designed to steer public sympathy. No media blitz fueled by emotion. But silence can be purposeful. And silence can also speak volumes. Observers began to notice how often Kandi returned to a single theme. Control. Control over her time. Control over her physical endurance. Control over her voice. Control over her story. The word kept reappearing. Control isn't about power. It's about grounding. And grounding usually follows disorder. Meanwhile, attention around Todd intensified, not because of bold public statements, but because of what remained unaddressed. When questions linger and responses stay deliberately indistinct, the empty spaces invite speculation. And speculation breeds pressure. As murmurs grew into discussion, focus gradually shifted towards something less visible, but far more consequential. The legal aftermath. Divorce doesn't conclude its separation. It reverberates through filings, through negotiations, through courtrooms. And according to sources familiar with the process, this phase introduced its own weight. Not dramatic outbursts in court, not sensational clashes, but procedural strain, deadlines, paperwork, language that transforms emotional decisions into enforceable commitments. That's where gravity sets in. Courts don't weigh intention. They weigh documentation. They don't assess effort. They assess consent. And within that framework, every decision made during a marriage comes under examination. Financial frameworks, business ties, long-term obligations. Nothing remains purely personal. Those close to the process suggest this stage forced both sides to confront the full scope of what they were leaving behind, not metaphorically, but legally. And that's often where fractures deepen. Because emotional resolution doesn't always arrive alongside legal closure. Kandi's composed exterior stood in stark contrast to the intensity unfolding behind the scenes. Balancing performance preparation with legal responsibilities requires separation of worlds. And separation isn't detachment. It's endurance. Todd, by contrast, was reportedly approaching the legal process from a more contemplative place. Not adversarial, not absent, but restrained. That stance is easy to mistake for peace. Sometimes it's surrender. And surrender carries its own strain. As Todd's position, according to those watching closely, stayed less defined. There was no competing narrative. No visible attempt to redirect focus. Only space. Space can signal grace. It can also breed isolation. And isolation magnifies introspection. As reactions continued to ripple outward, one theme overtook the conversation across platforms: timing. Not fault. Not allegiance. Timing. Why understanding arrives when it does. Why awareness follows change. Why some people evolve together while others evolve beyond one another. The courtroom didn't resolve those questions. It anchored them. Because once decisions are formalized and signatures applied, reflection no longer shifts reality. It only sharpens perspective. And perspective, when forged through loss, can be relentless. As the legal process advanced, the tension wasn't centered on victory. It was about what each person would move forward carrying. Kandi seemed to be carrying momentum. Todd appeared to be carrying awareness. Neither is weightless. But only one propels motion. And that's where separation becomes irreversible. Not through press statements. Not through filings. But through direction. One trajectory gains speed. The other hesitates. And hesitation invites reckoning. This aftermath wasn't loud. It unfolded quietly. Gradually. Inevitably. The kind of aftermath that doesn't dominate headlines for a moment, but reshapes lives over time. As courtroom doors closed on one chapter, the emotional gravity didn't vanish. It dispersed. Into labor. Into silence. Into questions that hurt without needing answers. And from a distance, one reality became increasingly clear. Some endings don't explode outward. They fracture inward until the distance between two people becomes built-in. Fixed. And once that framework settles, there is no revision. Only adjustment. That's where this story stands now. Not in spectacle. Not in blame. But in the tension between awareness that arrived too late and momentum that refused to wait. Because when the fallout quiets, the reactions fade, and the courtroom's empty. What remains is the space between remorse and resolve. And that space reveals the truth. This is the point where speculation falls away, and the story starts to feel uncomfortably human. Because once the noise dies down and attention shifts elsewhere, what remains isn't a narrative. It's a reckoning. One person actively rebuilding in front of the world. Another, reportedly, left carrying the weight of what can no longer be undone. And that contrast is what makes this moment so difficult to look away from. This was never only about a marriage ending. It was about timing. About awareness arriving after damage had already been done. About realizing that love, partnership, and stability rarely vanish in an instant. They wear down quietly while everyone assumes there's still time left. Kandi never framed herself as victorious. She never claimed to be whole. She simply continued forward. And sometimes, that's the most crushing outcome of all. Because forward motion is decisive. It doesn't wait for understanding. It doesn't slow down for remorse. On the other side, the quiet has carried its own message. When explanations fade, people start filling in the blanks. And those blanks don't soften over time. They sharpen. They settle. They become fixed. So the question no longer centers on who is right or who failed. The real question is this: how often do people recognize the worth of what they had only after watching someone else build a life without them? Because when that realization arrives, the door isn't merely closed, it's sealed shut. And if this story illustrates anything, it's that success doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up as calm, as peace. And peace is the one thing regret can never outrun. So consider it: if the positions were reversed, would you have noticed earlier? Would you have listened when it still mattered? Or would you be left explaining regret to an audience that has already moved forward? Share your thoughts below. Be honest. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about facing reality. And stay close, because even if this chapter has ended, the aftermath is still unfolding.